Welcome back to Not Like a Regular Mom. Today, I am so excited to be here with Stefanie O'Connell. Hi, Stefanie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
So, I am a writer. I have a book coming out in 2026 called The Ambition Penalty that I've been researching for years now, since during the pandemic. And I have a longer career writing about women, work, and money. And in the last 5 years, as I've been writing this book, really focusing in on women's ambition and how that's such a fraught subject matter in this day and age. Before I get into the book itself, I will just say that I have a very millennial origin story in that I graduated college in 2008, so in the recession, and so much of my early career and life, like so many of my peers, was really defined by that era and just trying to figure out how we operate in this new landscape when you don't have a clear 40-year career trajectory and a pension at the end of the rainbow. It's like, okay, how do we deal with the gig economy and maybe a 401k, maybe we don't have benefits, maybe that. So that's kind of how I got into the world of money and work and figuring out how it all goes together. But as I continued to report on those things over time, what I started to see was that a lot of what I thought was just do X, Y, and Z was a lot more complicated than just doing X, Y, and Z because of things like bias and discrimination and things that we certainly know about, but I think I had underestimated the extent to which that influences our outcomes. And so it really motivated me to start looking more into the kinds of myths and misconceptions that really pervade our ideas around women and work and money specifically, and how that influences our outcomes, our ambitions, and our lives.
Wow, I feel like I could talk to you about everything you said individually on a
Mm,
single podcast
there's a
episode
lot.
because, yeah, I also am a millennial, graduated during the recession, and we just had to make it up and we're still making it up as we go along.
Yeah,
So,
we
we
really
have a lot
are.
to talk about. Okay, so what inspired you to start your page and how did you decide to focus on systemic inequality that affects women? And as you put it perfectly to me as a millennial woman, the failed promises of girl power.
Yeah, so I would say that in addition to this kind of defining feature of the Great Recession for millennials, and I would say the subsequent generations after us, is this notion around what empowerment meant for women. And I would say even before the 2010s, where a lot of us were already starting our careers and we saw this huge influx of girl boss feminism, right? The advice to kind of lean in and speak up and ask for more. And this enthusiasm around this kind of corporate feminism and this aspiration to get into the C suite. Even well before that, in the 90s when I was a kid, it was girl power. It was girls can be whatever they want to be. And it was kind of exciting. I was part of the first take your daughters to work day cohort. I grew up totally immersed in Spice Girls and Destiny's Child, Independent Woman, Katy Perry, Roar. This has followed us throughout our whole lives. And I think what's really interesting about millennial women and all of us around the millennial generation's story is after a lifetime of all of this empowerment, where are we now? And where we are now is in some ways very, very upsetting. I just want to share some stats. We talk a lot about how women are more educated and ambitious than ever. That's true. What hasn't changed, though, in spite of all of that education, in spite of all of that ambition, in spite of all of the work that we have done over the course of these lifetimes, is our outcomes. So, the gender pay gap in the US for women working full time year round, for example, grew in 2024 for the second year in a row and returned to where it was in 2005, 20 years ago. So, again, that's before I graduated college, at least.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, collectively, kind of no better off than where we started our careers 20 years ago from a pay perspective. And it's not just pay, it's representation in positions of power and leadership. Of course, losing reproductive rights. We're in right now, in the course of the last year, witnessing the very targeted disempowerment of hundreds of thousands of Black women, for example, being pushed out of the paid labor force. We're seeing the mothers of young children pushed out of paid work this past year at record-setting rates. We're seeing the rate of women hired into leadership positions decline for the third year in a row, and we're seeing venture capital funding for women-led businesses fall to its lowest percentages since record-keeping began. So I have become completely interested in this total disconnect between all of our inputs, the education, the empowerment, the ambition, and then these outputs that show us actually we're not doing better. In a lot of ways, we are experiencing a severe backslide. And that's what's inspired the work that I'm doing now.
I love how you put it as an input and an output. That really resonates with me, because I was thinking recently, I worked so hard my entire life. I was so ambitious. And now in this job market and everything, I'm like, for what? What do I have to show for that other than pride, I guess? There's nothing to show for it. And I feel like a lot of women feel that way, where we're sort of stuck. And the stats that you shared are really interesting. Why do you think the last couple of years in particular, things have kind of taken a turn?
Well, we like to think that this stuff is just like individual. We think, oh, and we think this for a reason. We've been conditioned through our lifetimes of quote unquote empowerment to believe that getting ahead is just a matter of like an individual effort. That is really what this 2010s lean in girl boss feminism was all about. It says, if you want to get ahead, the only obstacle is yourself. You just got to be more confident. You just got to ask. And so what I think we're reckoning with right now is the fact that that wasn't true. And what really keeps women from getting ahead, because we've done all of those things, what really keeps us from getting ahead is the response to women who do that. When women do ask for more, they're less likely to get what they ask for. They're more likely to face backlash just for asking. I've interviewed women who've had job offers withdrawn, who've had backlash for asking for a raise, who have done all the things, quote unquote, right, only to be penalized for doing so. And that's really, the origin story for my book, The Ambition Penalty, which really quantifies the cost of this backlash. Now, that backlash is not new, but what is new is the explicitness of the backlash and the volume of it and the fact that it's getting worse. So we see now among younger generations of men, they believe that women's equality has gone, quote unquote, too far, and men are being asked to do too much to support that cause, even as men make up about 81% of leadership positions in corporate America, and they still make up, about 3/4 of the legislature, and they still make more than women across every education level and every race and ethnicity. It's just really striking that we're in this moment of sexism that is just so explicit and unashamed, but it's been modeled through the political administration. Like, this is not a secret. 2016, right. The election of 2016 happened 10 years ago now. So it's not surprising that 10 years later, we're seeing that hostility just be amped up and up and up as it's gone from something that was seen as fringe to something that's become more and more mainstreamed and accepted, and now becoming more tolerated with the next generation, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely not a coincidence. It seems like that's the point from this administration for sure. I love the term that you've coined, ambition penalty. And I know that you've sort of defined it in what you've been saying the last couple of minutes, but can you define it for us?
Yeah, so I define the ambition penalty as the cost women are made to pay for their ambitions. The professional cost, the financial cost, the personal cost, the social cost. And that cost can be, like I said, financial. It can be losing out on a job opportunity just because you did ask for more, you did negotiate the salary as you were told to do. It can be social. I document in heterosexual relationships the backlash women experience it when they outperform their male partners, for example, when they out earn male partners, they're subject to more risk of domestic violence and emotional abuse. I document how this plays out in family settings and the expectations and responses to women and girls who don't prioritize what is considered traditionally feminine, quote unquote, which is to center the needs of others and to self sacrifice, and particularly in the context of motherhood and wifehood above all else, in a way that really frames what women are expected and allowed to have as mutually exclusive, career and family, for example, as opposed to something that is experienced in tandem as it is for men. And so the ambition penalty is a way of acknowledging the fact that, women are doing all of these things that we have been told to do to get the things we want. We do not lack ambition. We do not lack confidence. We do not lack a willingness to take risks or speak up and ask for more. What we experience are penalties for doing so. And that is what is driving these huge and chronic gender gaps in pay, in power, and in leadership.
That is incredible. We need this book so badly. I am so glad that you're writing this because I cannot wait to read this, truly. So I want to talk more about gender in the workplace. So what's a stereotype or assumption that is the most frustrating to you regarding women in the workplace?
It's really hard to pick one. I mean, hey, I would certainly say, this idea that the workplace is already equal is very, very frustrating. The idea that the workplace is a meritocracy is very, very frustrating. And it's honestly hard for me to believe that anyone can believe that across gender identity, given how much we see all the time how incompetent people get ahead. I don't know about you, but in my experience,
yes.
Yeah, everyone's probably worked with a very incompetent person who's gotten ahead. And yet we are still out here pretending that the world is a meritocracy and that what you put in is what you get out. And that's just nonsense. And the data shows us that time and time and time again. But I think for me, the one I always come back to in the context of writing this book is just this idea that women don't ask. Women don't ask for more. And that's the problem. Anytime I make a video about gender inequality, gender pay gap, I will have every single time in my comments trolls telling me that it's all a myth and that the real problem is that, it's just this lack of ambition and this inability for women to negotiate. And there is a really great 2024 paper called Now Women Do Ask, and it's a call to update beliefs about the gender pay gap. And not only does it reconfirm previous findings that women actually do ask for more, they also find that the belief that women don't increases gender stereotyping, even on dimensions unrelated to salary negotiation. And these gender stereotypes are things like, women are just more risk averse, or women just have lower salary expectations, or men just compete more, or women just don't ask as often, and they are used to justify unequal pay and professional opportunity across gender identity, even as we have direct and accumulating evidence of the exact opposite. And it's the people who buy into these beliefs that are also less likely to support policies that actually reduce gender gaps in pay, like pay transparency, for example. So what is really striking to me as I've been doing this writing and research is that this myth making is not just about misperceptions. It has real material implications because it causes us to not only justify the status quo, but it makes us less willing to implement the kinds of interventions that would actually change the system to make it more equitable.
Wow. That reminds me sort of like a version, like the workplace version of the nag paradox, where, women are told, just ask your husband, you're asking him nicely to do things. It's like we shouldn't have to ask. But, in the workplace, negotiating is now baked in. And when we do, we're punished and we're seen as bad and aggressive. And how dare we, get out of line and ask for things? That's so, so interesting and infuriating. What do you think, in your opinion, based on your research, the ideal workplace would look like for women? Like right now, what do you think is missing or too excessive?
So, one of the things that I used as a framework for reimagining how work could work better, not just for women, but for everyone, is a framework that was developed by the American economist Janelle Jones. And it's a framework called Black Women Best. And the idea of it is that if you prioritize the needs and the interests of those who are already most marginalized by our existing systems of work, and I think it's important to think just beyond the workplace too, like the world and how we experience the economy and our lives. But if you center the needs and interests of those who are made most vulnerable by those systems, everyone will be better off as a result. So, like, if you create policy to meet the needs of those who are hurting most under the workplace, who are seeing the fewest opportunities, who are experiencing the fewest rewards, then of course, it's not just going to work better for those people, it's going to work better for everyone else too, who are comparatively less marginalized. And so, building off of that framework of Black Women Best, I think about single mothers. If you can make the workplace work for a single mother, then you will, by extension, make the workplace work better for everyone else. Unfortunately, the way we talk about these things now is kind of the opposite. We're like, oh, well, single moms just don't get ahead or make as much, and they're so much more likely to be in poverty and unable to support their children because, like, they have childcare demands, and so they can't be at work. And so them making less just makes sense. Instead of saying, that's absurd. These are the people who we have to make sure are most supported. Not being able to support your child when you are their primary caretaker and financial provider does not make sense. So instead of saying, okay, well, this is how work works and you don't fit into it, so you shouldn't have the rewards, let's say, let's make work work for you. Okay. If work is a problem where childcare hours and work hours are in constant conflict and there's constant uncertainty, how do we enable more flexibility that allows us to integrate the demands of the personal sphere and the professional sphere more sustainably, not just for single moms, but for everybody? But if you center it around what a single mom needs, it's going to work for everyone by extension. So this can be workplace flexibility. It can be, remote work. It can be a combination of the two. It can be raising the minimum wage. It can be reinforcing the social safety net. It can be implementing a universal basic income. It can be advancing equal pay policies, strengthening labor protections, passing universal paid family leave and medical leave, ensuring affordable, accessible, high quality childcare. Again, these are not just things that are limited to the workplace itself, but are things that I think, need to be in place on every single level of systems, from the interpersonal in our families, in our communities, to the institutional workplaces, organizations, in our communities, and then finally within, like, the larger cultural and political sphere. So, like, on the state, local, national level as well.
It's so crazy because if you think about, if they just implement different ways of working, different policies, how it would benefit corporations.
It does.
This wouldn't just benefit women. I don't know why. Has anyone just tried this? Like, is anyone going to be the test dummy for this? Because we're so close. We're so close to understanding that, hey, this isn't working at all right now for anyone. So it's just really infuriating, and it also makes me think of what disability advocates have been saying forever. Like ramps, for example, make it easier for everyone, parents with strollers, and I love that concept so much.
And the other thing that I would say is, one of the conclusions that I come to in the book is that one of the reasons these systems stay intact is that, as much as they actually hurt everyone, they do reinforce hierarchies of relative privilege. And so what you get is everyone is worse off as a result of these policies, but men will still be better off than women. Those who are white, are able-bodied, are straight, are still going to be better off than their counterpart, more marginalized
Right.
counterparts. That's what the system is. That's what these systems are designed to uphold. They're designed to uphold hierarchy as opposed to absolute well-being. And it's really, really hard to reframe that for people in a way that doesn't feel like an attack. And I think, again, to our discussion before about like why there's so much anti-feminist backlash and attacks on women's gains is because, what's the quote, equality feels like oppression when you've always been in a privileged group. So it feels like a threat when you're saying, actually, this is going to be good for you too. But if it means that our outcomes are going to be more equitable, even if it's just in raising my absolute well-being, if it's raising my absolute well-being more than it's raising your absolute well-being, but it's bringing us into alignment, you might still feel like you're losing something if you're more identified with this idea of, especially for men, masculinity as dominance.
It makes so much sense. It's so interconnected. It's just ridiculous. Again, it's right there. It's so frustrating. Okay, so the demise of girl boss culture. I'm all for that. Girl boss feminism. We needed to close that chapter decades ago. But the rise of tradwife culture is still so shocking to me that they seem like they couldn't be more different to me. I think at this point, I wish that we were at the point of finally reaching intersectional feminism, but I can't believe we're now at this point where it's like, it seems like, a zero sum game, girl boss feminism or tradwife feminism. And you've talked about what the tradwife and the girl boss have in common. Can you share your take on that?
Yeah, so in the book, what I do is I start with the girl boss feminism critique and take down that some of us have been talking about for a while. And I tried to add some of the more recent research, and I take us through, where it's really led us astray, what it's really enabled, and the costs of that. But at the end of the book, I bring us to where we are today, and this rise in not just the tradwife culture that really glorifies and glamorizes submission to men, but also even things that are less explicitly patriarchal, but serve as a kind of what's called the pink pill pipeline to tradwife culture, which is things like the soft life or feminine
Yes.
energy that really romanticize a withdrawal from the public life, from professional ambition. And what I would like to point out is a very specifically gendered withdrawal from public life and professional ambition. So it's not like a wholesale rejection of us being like, oh, let's be more anti-capitalist and really critique these power structures that have made us so burnt out and are really unsustainable and reimagine something better. No, 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 no. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is promoting an ideal of letting go of the life you want outside of is letting go of the life you want in like the professional sphere and the public sphere as something that's kind of liberatory, but through a decidedly feminine lens, right? All of these trends have these very, very feminine undertones. We're not seeing men making this kind of content. And I don't see that really recognized in the discourse enough, because what I think makes it feel so appealing and enticing is that they're speaking to the real dissatisfaction and burnout that we are experiencing right now in this moment with the fallout of girl boss culture and with the exhaustion of like living through the last 2, 3, 4 decades of life as, unions have gone away and labor protections have been stripped away and costs of living continue to rise. And so there is an appeal to this message of like, oh, it can just be more easy. But that appeal is really being presented through this framework that says, actually, the way you make it easy is by, just being more submissive, quote unquote, feminine, by patriarchal standards. And what that message shares with the girl boss, and this might not be immediately intuitive, but I hope it becomes so for those who read the book, is that it's the exact same kind of individualism that we critiqued in the girl boss. Just like the girl boss's solution to why women were struggling to get ahead was all about, well, what's wrong with women? What do you need to change about yourself? And telling women to look more internally into themselves about what they need to change to get more of what they want. The tradwife, the soft life, the feminine energy, it's all the same thing. It's a hugely individualistic, quote unquote, solution, not really a solution, to what's in fact a collective environmental problem. So what you're experiencing, the burnout, the not being able to get ahead, the frustration, is not something that's happening because of some defect within you. It is happening because of what is happening in the world around you. And both of these ideologies, even though they prescribe very different treatments for how to deal with that reality, they're both fundamentally flawed, because at the end of the day, when you retreat into yourself, you haven't changed anything about the system in the world around you that has subjected you to those barriers and has created that unsustainable burnout. So like, you can go for a walk in the woods and like, you can totally disconnect and have bubble baths and whatever all day, or spend your whole day baking, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that world is still waiting for you. And the truth is, doing domestic labor 24/7 for no pay is not going to cure your burnout.
Not at all. No.
In fact, it's probably going to make it worse. But really, the idea, the unifying idea, is that these are individual, quote unquote, solutions to what are in fact collective problems. And you cannot solve the collective problem with an individual solution. You need a collective solution, right? So there's a reason that tradwife is not advocating for universal basic income or affordable childcare, even though that would really enable more people to play or embody the role that these tradwives are performing. But their goal isn't really to have more people be able to embrace the lifestyles that they want, even if it is submission to a partner. Their goal isn't really just to have more women occupy the role of marriage and motherhood full time. Their goal is really to reinforce a gender division of labor and a gender division of power. And they don't support things that would enable more women to occupy these roles, because it means more men could occupy those roles too. And that would actually undermine the gender division of labor and gender division of power that these conservative and patriarchal ideologies are actually working to maintain.
That is such a great take. I could talk to you about that all day. I love that. I never really saw it as two sides of the same coin. And so I just think it's so fascinating. And I think it's interesting that I think I've always thought about it like tradwife life seems more acceptable because it's more like when women that I know at least are burnt out, it's usually they're pulled in the directions of work and family life and home life and all of that. Instead, it's less socially acceptable to ditch your husband who's not doing anything and pulling his weight than it is to just quit your job and be a stay-at-home mom. There's less of a stigma around that. So I think it's really sad that that seems like the option to avoid burnout.
We're in a very deeply patriarchal culture, but we won't admit to it. And that's what makes a lot of this stuff really hard to talk about, because people are incredibly defensive.
Right. And I think I'm personally just so exhausted by the choice feminism argument. You should support women, let women choose what they want to do. And it's not real. That's not really a choice.
Right. It's not, oh gosh, I have so many feelings about choice feminism that make me so enraged. And
Same,
it's
same.
sometimes, so in the past, I've always kind of just written down what I want to say and then I read it, but maybe I can articulate something here. A choice isn't feminism just because a woman is making it, right? Amy Coney Barrett chose to take away women's reproductive rights. That doesn't make it a feminist choice. And that is pretty obvious to people, most people at least. But then they use the same rhetoric when they're talking about something, right? So I think, again, it's about getting away from this idea of the individual and rather recognizing systems of power, patriarchal systems of power. So it's not just about what I choose to do, it's about how is my choice upholding or or reinforcing, or is it actively challenging and working to dismantle these existing systems of male dominance and patriarchal power? And sometimes, like, my choices don't challenge it. Sometimes they do reinforce it. I'm talking to you on this call, I'm wearing makeup, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a compromise, like, that I'm making, and we're all kind of making as a survival mechanism. Like, it's a coping strategy. So what I like to do is to differentiate between what is kind of like a coping mechanism for living in patriarchy versus justifying patriarchy. To justify it would be like, oh, well, it's just my personal choice and I feel empowered. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I am wearing, why do I feel empowered? Well, because it makes me comply with the standard that is rewarded and gives me status, right? So, what I won't do is gaslight anyone into saying that, like, me sitting here wearing makeup as a personal choice is some kind of feminist victory, because it's not. It's what I'm doing imperfectly to get through my own life, in our existing system. And we're all making those kinds of choices all the time. And that is really, really understandable. I get it. But what I really don't have the tolerance for is to reframe those coping mechanisms as like justifications or even worse, empowerment.
You nailed that. That is so perfect. I think about this stuff all the time, and there's so much conversation around this when it comes to stay-at-home moms and well, more like just tradwives versus girl boss and all of that. And it's just like we need to just let women make their own choices, and it's
Yeah.
just there's so much nuance that's just left out of all of those conversations. So I really love that you broke that down.
Yeah, and I dedicated a whole chapter of my book to this idea that women just make different choices. They have naturally different preferences, and that's why they're so underpaid and underrepresented and all this other stuff. It's just nonsense. Like, I don't really have a tolerance for it, and I get so upset, as you can probably tell, as when I talk about it.
I do
So
too.
I do hope everyone reads the book, because I have tried to express it a lot more clearly there.
I can't wait. I'm sure you were so eloquent right now, so I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on moms deciding to stay home due to daycare costs, like canceling out their salaries? There was a mom on a local mom group who posted something that I think will stick with me forever. She was like, "I have three kids. They need to all be in daycare because I need to work, but I can't afford daycare, so I don't know how I'm supposed to work, and I can't not work because then we can't afford to live." And I've heard the arguments that, well, why are we only focusing on the women's salary? But I would love to hear your take on all of that.
It First of all, I just want to validate that it is so crazy that this is the system,
Yeah.
and that all of us are somehow kind of dealing and navigating with it in some way is a miracle. I have one kid and I can, like, barely keep my head above water. And I love her and I love my job and I have so much privilege and so much working in my favor, and it's still hard for me. So I just want to put that out there and validate, like, this is
Absolutely.
hard,
So hard.
and it's hard by design. They want to push women out of the labor force. Childcare costs are going up and up and up. Support subsidies are being removed and removed and removed. It is really intentional, and I think it's important that we are aware that it is intentional. But that doesn't necessarily make it easier for us who are navigating the logistical reality of what it means for our lives and our budgets. One thing I do want to bring the conversation back to is what you mentioned, is that this, especially within a household, is if you're in a partnership with more than one person, this is a household cost. This is not a individual cost. It is so often a cost that we talk about as gendered, and it's always, I don't hear men comparing their salaries to the cost of childcare, even though mothers are 45% of the household breadwinners in the United States. And
Wow.
so I think we should always keep this context in mind and remember that this is a household cost. We don't compare our rent to just one income. We don't compare the cost of food or whatever to just one income, right? So it's a shared expense if you are in a household with more than one earner. But even beyond that, I also think it's important to think of this big picture, not just in terms of the trade off of income, but of course, the trade off of career progression, the trade off of the raises you could get for the time that you were out of the workforce, the trade off of the health care that you may or may not have access to if you leave your job, the retirement contributions, the compounding of those retirement contributions. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to scale back and zoom out on your career. And remember that your career is a long trajectory and not a 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever year trajectory of the time that your children are young and need you for that time. So just like you think about college as a time that you invest in your career and you're out of the labor force, you're actually spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think you can think about childcare in a similar way. And this is a more viable framework for some careers than others, admittedly. But I do think it is something to really think about in those terms of like, this is an investment in your career, even if you aren't breaking even if you're going into debt. Like, the fact is, like, just like you maybe went into debt for it to pay off for you in the long run for school. Same thing with childcare, right? And I think even if you are a stay-at-home parent, to be honest, you should also have childcare because it's not just an investment in your career progression and your economic autonomy. It is an investment in your well-being. You do deserve some time for yourself and your life and your mental health and your well-being. And one of the reasons that the system is enabled to stay as unsustainable as it is because, like, it does push women out and it enables men to continue with their career trajectories and their mental health and well-being kind of unimpeded. And as long as that system works for them, they're not incentivized to change it. But if women continue to engage in the workforce and that labor cannot be, that childcare and homemaking labor cannot be sloughed off on women for no compensation, then men will have to feel the consequences of this squeeze as well. And they will also need more flexible schedules because they will not be able to rely on a stay-at-home parent to pick up the slack for them for free.
Yes. Oh my God, to everything. I really love that perspective of seeing it the way we invest in college and we kind of take that on and just, I mean, it's awful. It should never, neither should cost this
No,
much.
none of these systems are right. I'm not here to justify these
No,
systems by
totally. It
any
does not
means,
sound like that.
but I do hope it can give people a little bit more
Yeah.
perspective and maybe just like a little bit more grace for how hard it is and how
Yeah.
like it, you can't like out hack it really. So if you feel bad that like you haven't figured out how to like make it work better, like don't. It's really that bad. It is that bad.
I think a lot of parents are going to feel really validated just hearing that perspective. Like, okay, that makes sense of this choice. I think there's so much guilt of like, oh, I feel sick about how much money I've spent on
Yeah.
daycare for my child by the time they get to kindergarten. So I just really love that. I'm going to be sharing that left and right. I wanted to switch gears and talk about gender and domestic inequity because this is something that my friends probably want me to stop talking about all the time, but I'm obsessed. It's just, it comes up all the time. It's everywhere for me. And I know that this is something that you focus on a lot. So, what's a fact that blew your mind in your research about men and women and domestic inequity?
So there was a recent analysis of American time use data, and it concluded that men's housework time is, quote, inelastic to relative household wages, which means that regardless of what men are earning, it doesn't really make a difference on their contributions to the household by and large. Men who earn half as much as their wives do about as little housework as men who earn twice as much as their spouses. So there often is this framing of household inequality as a logistical problem or a
Right.
math problem. Like, well, it just makes sense that women do so much more household labor, so much more childcare than their male counterparts because they make less money. And the data just shows that's not the case. Women do more household labor even when they are the financial breadwinners, even when they have the less flexible schedule, even when they are the ones who are managing, more demands all of the time. And it's really remarkable the extent to which this kind of inequality continues to be dismissed as not a big deal, or kind of like a peripheral problem, when it's actually something that directly and drastically undermines women's financial well-being, their mental health, their physical health, and the household dynamic that they're passing on to their children.
Yeah, and it's so normalized. People don't even bat an eye about any of it. It's just like, oh, like when I read a statistic that didn't necessarily shock me, but it just really stuck with me, that when a couple gets divorced, the domestic labor for women goes down and for men it goes up, and it's like it's right there.
It's
Or
right there.
fair play, like the spreadsheet, if you make a spreadsheet over who's doing what, it's right there. I thought that was so mind-blowing that the income doesn't even affect, it's just gender. It's so unfair.
Yeah. Well, what I say, it's household inequality isn't a math problem or a logistical problem or a communication problem. It's a power problem. It's a
Yes.
power problem of whose needs are going to be prioritized and whose labor is going to be used to support it. And what we see in heterosexual relationships is that it is overwhelmingly men's interests, ambitions, needs are prioritized, often at women's direct expense, and using and exploiting, frankly, women's labor, time, and energy. And it's really painful to acknowledge that. And I understand that. And I do understand. I didn't start with this perspective, I just want to say. But I have come to this conclusion after writing this book and reading reams and reams and reams of research, that this is the true in the vast majority of heterosexual relationships, according to the data. I'm not speaking about this personally or individually, though pretty much every person I've ever spoken to
Right.
can, validate these dynamics in some capacity in their own relationships. But when you look at it statistically, it's well over 90% of heterosexual relationships that fall into these dynamics. So the idea that this isn't a big deal, or it's like kind of close, or it's just like, just choose better. Like, there is no choosing better. This is the default setting of almost every single heterosexual relationship.
It's so disturbing to me. And yeah, it's almost everyone I know is in this situation. And these are women who are feminist and smart, and it's not on them. And it's like there's so much shame in it, and there shouldn't be. It's, ugh, I could go on about that one.
The shame is by design. The shame is by
Yeah,
design because if you feel ashamed, you won't share,
right,
or
right.
you'll find a way to say, well, it just makes sense. So, like, I just talked about how we talk about it like it's like a math problem or a communication problem. You'll hear both men and women say this all the time. Well, it's just that his job is more flexible, or I prefer this, or I like this. But the fact is, like, household inequality stays in place even when all of those excuses fall away. It's been documented incredibly well in incredible detail by research. I was reading Arlie Hochschild's book called The Second Shift, which was
I
written
love that book.
decades ago, like
Yeah,
before I was born. The
right.
research was done before I was born, and it's absolutely unbelievable to read because it reads like a conversation that I would have with a girlfriend today. And I think I was flattened by the extent to which nothing has changed, even though women today perceive themselves to be, or want to be aspirationally, in partnership. And I think it's really, really painful to come to terms with the fact that that partnership is really not available to women in any meaningful capacity.
Right. And it's to those of us who have seen the light, it really, it's hard to not see it as exploitation. It's really hard to feel
I'm
comfortable.
sorry, but it is exploitation. Like, I know
Exactly.
that's really like a really radical
Exactly.
thing to say, but I don't know that people reading my book can come to a different conclusion because it is just so statistically validated that it's exploitation.
Right. I even, what you were just mentioning just reminded me of, I'm sure you've heard of this research where they did some sort of study where they had like the woman was a doctor and the wife was a doctor and the husband was a lawyer. And they said, whose job is more flexible? And then they switched the genders. And every time the woman was like, well, my job has more flexibility, so we can move and I'll take care of the
Exactly.
kids. And
Exactly. And this is a good example because it's not just household labor, it's household power. That's why I said it's not just
yeah.
logistics. It's always about
Wow.
upholding men's interests and power at the expense of women's and using women's labor to support it. And so it's things like what you just mentioned. It's who's going to be expected to sacrifice, who's going to be expected if there's a sick day to take on that responsibility. If we're going to have to move for someone's job, oh, it's overwhelmingly men's. Women's careers never recover. And then that entrenches further inequality, right? So then you've moved, and then his career got ahead, yours took a step back. Oh, and then you're pregnant. Well, actually, it just makes sense now for you to be the one to take more time, more leave. Oh, well, now it just makes sense for us to double down more on you supporting my career because, I'm the one who has a chance at like getting tenure here. And then like it locks it in and locks it in with every subsequent phase. And then you get into this position where you're like, how did I get here?
Right. It's so interesting too, because I think that you spoke about this on your page, that even free time
Mm,
is sort of a power, there's the power dynamic there, how it's not actually our paid work that determines the work-life balance. And the writer Anne Helen Peterson, I don't know if you follow her, she's spoken
yes,
about how, I love her.
she's
She's
great.
spoken about how women's hobbies are typically close to home or in the home, whereas men, it's like golf and oh, it takes 8 hours and things like that. It's really ridiculous.
Well, this is the data I've been really obsessed with in the context of the conversation around burnout and tradwife and soft life and all this nonsense. Is just like, oh, if you want to understand why women are so burnt out, we shouldn't be looking at paid work. We should be looking at leisure. And what you see is a huge gender leisure gap where men have substantially more free time than women, even though they are also benefiting more at work. Right? So it's
Totally.
not paid work that's the problem. A
Totally.
2024 analysis of American time use data finds that in the US, women overall have 13% less free time than men on average. And that gender gap widens to 23% for women between the ages of 35 and 44. And it's a gender gap that holds in men's favor across age, ethnicity, education, marital status, children in the household. So it's not just like, oh, yeah, well, you have a young kid or anything. No, no, no. This is constant. It lasts a lifetime. And I'm going to quote the report. They say for full time workers, it is as if men get a month more a year of vacation compared to their women peers. So anytime we're like, these systems are just so unsustainable and then why are we so tired? Please remember this data and remember that like it's probably, I mean, there's a lot about paid work in the workforce we can talk about and we have talked
Yeah.
about. That's a problem, but it's not your paid work generally that's driving this stuff. If it was, then men wouldn't have so much more work life balance than women.
That is so wild. I'm never going to forget these statistics. So, why do you think there's so much discussion around all of this now? I think we all sort of assume that's because of the pandemic. But if the pandemic didn't happen, do you think we'd be having the same conversations as we are now?
Yeah, I think this is more of a generational shift of, we're talking about millennial women are now middle age. I'll be 40 right after this book comes out. So what we have is like a whole cohort of young women, and then like even for Gen X women who are ahead of us, it is women who came of age in this era of girl power, of girl boss, and in terms of like what that means in their personal lives, really expected partnership and wound up experiencing patriarchy. And there is a huge disconnect and a reality between like this expectation of like, oh, I thought this was a relationship of equals. And actually, no, this is like a relationship that is predicated on me doing just as much unpaid labor as the generations before me, even as I do just as much paid labor as you. And so men are just doing as little housework as they were like decades ago. And where it's improved, it's so marginal.
Mm,
And it's
yes.
really celebrated, like, oh, men are doing more than ever. But, you're comparing what that does is like compare what working men and working women are doing. How they compare to each other, and instead comparing working men today to working men like 50 years ago when they had like a
Exactly.
stay-at-home partner. So it's not really a real comparison. And what it does is it's just like a way of conditioning women into being grateful for what is actually completely exhausting and unsustainable inequality. And so I think we've been so gaslit that with like these messages that well these guys are like they changed a diaper. They changed a diaper. We should celebrate. Like, are you kidding me? Like, no wonder women are so exhausted. Like, no wonder we're feeling this inflection point of like, oh my gosh, this is so unsustainable. How did I get here? I think the messaging, though, is just like, well, it's better than it used to be. It makes sense. All of this stuff that conditions us into suppressing this anger and frustration and disillusionment and making us think that it's a personal problem, that it's something we could just communicate our way out of or like checklist our way out of or organize our way out of if we just find like the right system or notebook. And we're already conditioned to do that. Like that girl boss culture conditioned us to always take the blame. What can I do better? How can I speak up more? How could I assert myself more? And like just making a list is the same thing. But
Yes.
you can't solve a power problem with a list. Like you cannot make someone value you and your time and what you care about and your interests if they don't want to. And that's hard to accept.
You can't solve a power problem with a list. That should be like part of your book. That should be the
Oh,
tagline.
thank
That
you.
is so
I haven't written
good.
that down anywhere, so I'll try to
I
remember.
think you should. That's just it's brilliant. It just really nails it to me. Do you think that women, I mean, I know the answer to this, but have women always been this burnt out, or do you think our generation is experiencing motherhood differently? And maybe it's because of some of the things you've touched on, but when I speak to, family members and older women, they're just like, I just don't remember it being that hard. And it's like, did you hit your head? I don't understand. And I know that like families rarely acknowledge these things. And I'm always thinking about the fact that like, okay, well, your grandmothers were probably on some combination of like uppers and downers to get through the
Yeah.
day. It was just there's such a sense of denial there.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there is the conditioning of like I should just be grateful. I have these beautiful children. I have these beautiful grandchildren, right? I'm not going to go ahead and talk about how bad things were, but you can go ahead and read Betty Friedan's work. You can go read the literature from the women's movement. Like the reason feminism happened was because of the 1950s. It wasn't good. Women were very, very unhappy. I know, and when I say feminism, I mean like that second wave feminism and the women's movement of the 70s. Like that was born out of what is idealized in this tradwife content as being like the ideal to aspire to. But it's actually that aspiration that created enough momentum to say this sucks, right? Like we can't do this anymore. We are so unhappy. Like we have to have credit cards. We have to be able to have jobs. We have to be able to not be fired if we're pregnant, right? So I would say what is probably more unique about current living standards is like, first of all, there are these bigger economic stressors for everyone, regardless of parenthood status and gender identity. Like, there's so much less economic stability. There is so much less access to basic things like benefits like healthcare, pension, even 401ks can be tough to access. There's just constant fragility in terms of like our finances because things cost so much, and childcare specifically is just an absolutely outrageous cost. Also paired with the cost of housing, it's a completely outrageous cost. So I
Right.
think those stressors are up, 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 up in terms of like economic pressures and uncertainty pressures. And then also, women are spending more time with their children than ever. And that's not something we always talk about, but it's true. Like, spend more time actively parenting our children, even though most women are in the labor force today. We spend more time than stay-at-home mothers spent doing these activities, 30 years ago. It's a wild stat. But
That is wild.
and people love to say, well, that's a choice. It's just intensive parenting. And now that I have a kid, I'm like, oh my God, that's nonsense. Like, I'm always looking for a way to make my parenting easier to like
Totally.
do
We're all
less. My
trying to
child
hack
is
our
in
way.
no activity and I pay for childcare. Like, I tried to get all the support I can. I'm like, I literally couldn't spend less time with my daughter without like creating a very neglectful situation.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
oh, it's broader forces. It's housing, the way housing works. I thankfully live in New York City, so for me, people are like, New York City, that sounds like a nightmare for parenting. For me, it's actually wonderful because people come here, so it connects me
Yeah.
to community more. But a lot of people are like in single family housing. They're moving more for their careers, so they might be like not just in a place where they have to drive everywhere and be further away from community, but they might be in a community that they didn't grow up in. They don't know, like, and they might be moving every couple of years because the job market is so unstable. And so there
Yeah.
are a lot of these bigger macro pressures that are on all of this that consequently make parenting so much more stressful.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's just there's certain things that different generations of women seem to have a hard time understanding, and it's almost hard to put into words. And my friends have brought up the point yesterday. I was having a conversation with my friend about all this, and she's like, "Our moms didn't have to worry about even screen time and what
Yeah.
is in the food that we're eating. Like they just plopped us in front of the TV and it was fine." So that makes a lot of sense. But I think having conversations about domestic inequity with other women, and there's so much defensiveness that can kind of come up, and defensiveness around their agreements with their husbands and in their relationship. So why do you think that is, and how can we have these conversations in a productive, supportive way?
Well, I think it really goes back to what we were talking about before, where it's like it's really hard to reconcile the fact that like you're in a relationship with someone who really isn't respecting your time and valuing your interests and supporting you in any material way, even if they claim to. And that is something that can take a really long time to come to terms with. But one of the ways that I think we can talk about this a little bit more usefully is to talk about heterosexual relationships and especially institutions like heterosexual marriage and motherhood as institutions with common statistical dynamics as opposed to like just what we are personally or individually experiencing, because it helps us kind of contextualize these things as broader dynamics. Like we always think, it's just me and you in this relationship, but our relationships, not just romantic, of all kinds, are actually informed by the culture around us, the social expectations, what we're told a man or a woman is supposed to be, a mother or father is supposed to be, where those ideas come from, how people respond to us when we act on them or don't act on them, the punishments we get if we don't comply with what those standards are from our partners, from other parents at school, from teachers. So I think, again, it's important to think of these as institutional forces as opposed to simply individual or personal forces. And then it can let us let go of some of like the self-blame or the internalization of the problem and say, oh, it's just me, like I'm just not communicating it right, or like I just have to ask nicer, or ask more assertively, or ask nicer, or ask more assertively, or ask nicer, right? Like it's a doom
Yeah.
loop. Like, get out of the doom loop. It's a bigger, broader dynamic. And if you can situate yourself within the broader dynamic, you can kind of like get out of your own head, see it within the context of like the broader culture and expectations. And then it also gives your partner a chance to meet you in that conversation in a way that maybe feels a little bit less like an attack and more like, oh, this is true for like basically all relationships, and I feel like we're falling into this dynamic and it's not really working for me, and I don't know if it's working for you, but I think we should talk about it.
That leads me into my next question is I know that it's not a personal issue. There's not going to be an individual solution, but every man I know seems to think that he's doing enough. And I just want to know what do you wish women knew before or did before partnering with men, what changes need to be made interpersonally and systemically, and how do we make these changes? What conversations should we be having? What should we be aware of?
I think we should be very clear that household inequality, intimate inequality, is a big deal. This isn't just chores. It's not dirty dishes. It's not however we want to reduce it, whatever we want to reduce it into being to like brush it away or have people gaslight us into believing that it's not a big deal. This is how you spend your life. And if someone is robbing you of the time, energy, space to spend your life doing the things that you care about, that is a fundamentally huge deal. That is something that like we should not minimize ever, ever, ever. And I think it's important, again, that we take this institutional view that that's what heterosexual relationships do. Heterosexual relationships are patriarchal power dynamics by default. Look at the naming conventions, right? Most women still take their husband's last name, even though most single women say they don't really care. But it's not an accident.
Right.
It's like 96% of kids have their father's last name. That's
Right.
literally a patriarchal power dynamic. And you can say it's just a name, it doesn't matter. If it didn't matter, it wouldn't fall along the 96% lines. You can't get 96% of people to do anything. Okay. Let's be honest about what these relationships are. They're patriarchal relationships by default. And it's something that we experience individually and personally, but they're not things that we've made patriarchal because of something we've done individually or personally. Like, it's not our fault that they are. That's just how they are by default. So what we have to do is like recognize these default dynamics and be very aware of them and be able to say, how do we reimagine it differently? You know, even among those who are claiming to hold progressive values and egalitarian ideals, the data is consistently showing men actively avoiding the unpaid labor that enables their partners to pursue their ambitions in the same ways that they get to, or sabotaging their partner's successes using threats of like backlash or abandonment and even abuse as a way of undermining their partner's independent achievements. So, you know, women who are expecting partnership wind up experiencing this unexpected power struggle and internalizing it as something that's wrong with themselves instead of something that's wrong with a relationship built to incentivize men's dominance and women's submission. And so then we're reminding women, oh, relationships take sacrifice, and then we condition them to giving up more and more and more of whatever else that they might want in the name of a relationship that offers like little to no compromise in return. So it's really, really important that we are not recasting this kind of inequality as fair or legitimate or justified, because that's not just about what it does to ourselves and our lives, but it's also something that maintains and perpetuates this gender hierarchy for ourselves and for the next generation. And it undermines the collective action that can actually challenge the unequal status quo. You know, it challenges support for policies that would enable men, women, and all marginalized genders to integrate their personal and professional ambitions and lives a lot more sustainably. So I think we should recognize the unequal division of mental, physical, emotional labor as not like an inconvenience or annoyance or a frustration, but a tool for like systematically undermining and exploiting women to benefit men. And again, it sounds kind of harsh, but
No, it's reality.
I think it's important, because otherwise, you know, women are just like put in this position of trying to convince their male partners that, you know, taking care of their own children is not babysitting, or cleaning their own toilet is not a favor, as though like, again, that it's like this individual communication problem when they're facing an actual power problem. And the patriarchal power inside the home is something that mirrors and upholds the patriarchal power outside of it. And I think that's an important perspective to keep in mind too, because what's happening in the home is what enables inequality to continue in the workplace. It's what enables it to continue in the political sphere. It's what enables it to continue in the world. And so I think like women being chronically unsupported, undervalued, and exploited while their mistreatment is just like accepted as the way men are, in the context of relationships that are supposed to be built on a commitment to like mutual respect and love and care, is just not acceptable.
That was incredible. That you said so many things that, again, it could be individual podcasts. Talking about the mental load, the mental emotional labor, all of these things that we could talk about truly for hours. It's just you really nailed that. I'm just so grateful that I have this information that I can share with my friends and my listeners, and I could, like I said, talk to you for days. But we unfortunately have to wrap up. But I want to hear your best piece of advice for our listeners.
I think I think the biggest thing is that whenever inequality or frustration or problem we're talking about is that we always think of it, or we've been conditioned to think of it as something that's personal and individual. And that is the framework that's really hurting us, because these are not personal problems. These are institutional problems. These are power problems. These are systemic problems. And when I say that, people will often be like, oh, well, I hate that because it makes me feel like, well, there's nothing I can do to change it. But just think about household inequality. Like, household inequality is a systemic problem, but it's something that could be changed literally today. There is literally no barrier to someone doing more labor in their home, to a man doing more labor in the home if he's actually committed to it. There is a barrier to women who want a more equitable distribution of labor in their home, but can't get it. And that's the behavior of their partners, who may suggest that they are willing to do it, but then not do it. So, in that sense, I think it's important to confront this reality of the system and then say, okay, if this is what it is, what do I need to do with total acceptance of that? Instead of saying, okay, I can just like individually hack my way out of this, what if I accept that this is a system for what it is? Okay, is this something I am willing to live with for the rest of my life? No? Well, maybe I reevaluate this relationship. If I'm not in that place yet, how do I get to a place where I can feel like I can live within the current setup? So, for example, I spoke to women who would have after work events that they had to go to, and their partners would bail at the last minute all the time. And it would hurt women's career trajectories. And it would be so frustrating, and they'd be so stressed, and they'd be so exhausted. And then they started building up systems of resilience. They said, oh, I need to accept that this is going to happen, and I can't just leave it on a gamble. So if I accept that I cannot count on this person who says they are my partner, what do I need to have in place to make sure that I am not the backstop? So I can build my village, I can build my financial resources, I can build my backup care. So I think this is really about thinking about the reality of these systems, and then building resilience, not through just telling us to be more this or less this, but again, expanding outward, like thinking beyond the nuclear family or a romantic relationship, and like building community in ways that build our emotional support, our financial support, our personal support and health. Like, it's so important that we recognize that, it's not about the hyper independence of the girl boss, and it's not about the hyper dependence of the tradwife. It's in between, where we are all interdependent on one another. And the more we can diversify our sources of support, our opportunity, our well-being, our everything, like, the better off we're going to be.
I am so glad that you ended with that, because I was really hoping that you would give some sort of tangible advice, because we talked about so much that it's systemic, it's not individual, but it does sort of leave you with, what do I do? And I think that was just really beautiful how you put all of that. And I'm so grateful that you shared that. Thank you so much.
I'm glad I was able to wrap it up somehow.
You did. It's just perfect. I feel like I have to have you back to talk about, like I said, all of these little moments. I was like, wait, that's a whole episode in itself. This is like an hours long conversation. Um,
That's how I
but
felt writing my book. Every chapter could have been a book of its own. There's just
I'm
so
sure
much in all of these things to dig into.
you really have like career security, honestly.
I don't know about
This
that.
topic has a
It's
lot
not
of,
really financially lucrative, but it is interesting.
well, I'm so excited for your book. Can you tell us where to follow you, where to pre-order your book, and any other closing thoughts?
Sure. So the book is called The Ambition Penalty: How Corporate Culture Tells Women to Step Up and Then Pushes Them Down. It's available for pre order pretty much anywhere you get your books, I think. Barnes Noble, Amazon, Bookshop. You could probably ask your local bookstore at this point also to order for you. It will be available on audiobook too. That is not available for pre order yet, but it will be. The book's coming out in May, but pre orders are really important because it shows that there's demand for the book, and booksellers will stock it if they see, oh, people want to have this book in the bookstore. So appreciate everyone who can pre-order. And then I'm also online pretty actively on Instagram at Stefanie O'Connell, Stephanie with an F. And I have a newsletter too called Too Ambitious, where I dig into these ideas some more. So, I'm kind of everywhere.
Thank you so much. This has been honestly just such a pleasure to talk to you. I feel sane. I feel a little bit more sane about all of this. It's not less frustrating, but it makes so much sense.
Honestly, I hope that that's what my work does for people. I'm not saying that when I was writing this book, it was hard to sell to publishers because it wasn't like, hey, just do XYZ and everything is solved, because that really isn't how things work. But
Right.
the myth that is how it works is what's keeping us stuck where we are. And so I hope that not only is this kind of validating for people, but it also opens up our imaginations to something different, because it really is radical to live your life in a way that goes against the status quo, and the status quo being like that you should just care for others, prioritize their ambitions at your own expense all the time, instead of recognizing like, oh, women are already doing more than enough care work on
Right.
behalf of absolutely everyone, and what we
Yes.
really need is for them to be valued for it.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you for everything that you do. I am so grateful that I was able to have you on this podcast. And everyone give Stephanie a follow. Please pre-order her book. You will not regret it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.